Your body is trying to tell you something, and you've been ignoring it for years. Not because you're careless, but because no one ever taught you to listen. At 40, things change, and the changes aren't what you were told to expect. You believed that your 30s would be the decade where everything stabilized. You had been told, by magazines, by your mother, by the cultural narrative that surrounded you, that by 30 you would have figured out the fundamentals. Your career would be solid, your relationship would be settled, your body would finally do what you asked of it. You thought that hard work in your 20s would pay off with ease in your 30s. You were wrong, but not in the way you think. What actually happened? Your 30s weren't a reward for your 20s. They were an escalation. Your career demanded more visibility, more responsibility, more hours. Your relationship, if you had one, began requiring emotional labor that went beyond the initial attraction. You started having conversations about money, about children, about futures that suddenly felt less abstract and more urgent. Your body began to change in ways that weren't dramatic enough to name, but constant enough to notice. Your skin required different products. Your sleep became lighter. Recovery from exercise took longer. You stopped being able to eat whatever you wanted without consequences. But here's what no one told you. These changes were not failures. They were signals. Your body was beginning a conversation with you about what it actually needed versus what you had been taught to demand from it. But you couldn't hear it yet, because the culture around you was still telling you that your 30s were supposed to be your prime. If your body was changing, it meant you were losing your prime, not that you were entering something different. So you pushed harder. You tried to maintain the body of your 20s. You tried to maintain the energy of your 20s. You tried to maintain the invisibility of your youth, that gift where you could exist without being constantly evaluated. You deserved to know that your 30s were not a continuation of your 20s with more money. They were a transition to a completely different phase of life, and your body was trying to prepare you for it. By 35, the pressure had compounded. If you didn't have children by now, there was a clock. If you did have children, there was an expectation of a certain type of motherhood that required you to be simultaneously present and ambitious. If you were single, there was a suggestion, sometimes explicit, often implicit, that something was wrong with you. If you were married, there was an assumption that you should be thinking about another child or accepting that you wouldn't have one. Your career had entered a critical window. In your 30s, you could still be seen as promising. By 35, you were either on the path to leadership or you were being quietly sidelined. The rules had changed. The criteria had become less forgiving. You couldn't simply be competent anymore. You had to be exceptional or you would be overlooked. And your body had begun a transformation that the culture had no language for. What the culture told you would happen. You would still be desirable, but in a different way. You would be sophisticated. You would have wisdom. You would trade the desperation of youth for the confidence of experience. What actually happened? You became invisible in ways that were both liberating and devastating. Men stopped looking at you the way they used to, not because you were less beautiful, but because the specific type of beauty that was valued was younger. You could feel the shift in meetings, in social situations, in how you were treated by service workers, by strangers on the street. Some of this invisibility was a gift. For the first time in your life, you could exist in public without being constantly evaluated for your sexual market value. That was freedom. But it also meant that a certain type of attention, the attention that had been coded as mattering, was being withdrawn. And you had to reckon with the fact that some part of you still wanted it, even though you intellectually knew it was toxic. Your body continued to change. Your metabolism had slowed. Your skin had shifted. Your hormones were beginning their slow recalibration. You were retaining water differently. Your hair was changing texture. Your sleep was becoming unpredictable. Here's what no one told you. Your body wasn't failing. It was beginning to stop performing for an external audience and start existing for itself. But you didn't have the framework to understand this as evolution. You only had the framework to understand it as loss. By 38, you had started to count, not consciously necessarily. But every birthday began to carry a weight that it hadn't before. You became aware of the window closing on certain choices, the biological window, the career window, the still be considered young enough for XYZ window. If you wanted children, you were aware that the timeline was becoming finite. If you didn't want children, you were aware that people were beginning to ask, or stop asking, with a certain resignation, as if the choice had been made for you. If you were in a relationship, you were aware of a new pressure. The relationship wasn't just about the two of you anymore. It was about whether it would provide stability, whether it would provide security, whether it would provide the future you had imagined. If the relationship was unstable, the stakes suddenly felt higher because time was running out to find something better. If you were single, the pressure was different, but equally intense. There was an urgency that hadn't existed before, not from you necessarily, but from the culture, from your family, from the internalized voice that had been trained into you since childhood. Your career had also reached a critical juncture. By 38, you were either firmly established or you were beginning to understand that the level you had reached might be the level you stayed at. The pathway to advancement was becoming visible, or it was disappearing. What you were told, that 40 was the new 30, that age was just a number, that you had your whole life ahead of you. What was actually true, that you had entered a different phase of life where certain things were no longer available to you, and other things were becoming possible. That time had a different texture now, that you couldn't simply will things into existence anymore through youth and ambition. And your body was preparing for menopause in ways that science is still learning to understand. You deserved to know that the anxiety you were feeling wasn't irrational. The timeline was real, the window was real, the changing rules were real. But they weren't a personal failure. They were the collision between your life and a system that had never been designed to support a woman in her late 30s. You're 40 now, and everything feels different in a way that you can't quite articulate. Your 30s were about competence, about proving yourself, about building. Your 40s are about something else entirely. What you thought would happen at 40, that you would finally feel like an adult, that the insecurity would fade, that you would finally know who you were and stop questioning it, that the anxiety about your choices would resolve into acceptance. What is actually happening? Something more complex and more unsettling. You are beginning to understand, perhaps for the first time with real clarity, what was taken from you. The expectations placed on your body as a young woman, the way you were taught to prioritize external validation over internal knowing, the careers you didn't pursue because they weren't practical, the relationships you stayed in too long because leaving felt like failure, the friendships you let fade because there wasn't time, the parts of yourself that you compartmentalized so effectively that you forgot they existed. And you're grieving, not dramatically, not in a way that allows for resolution, but in a way that's constant and quiet and present. Your body is in perimenopause or approaching it, and no one, absolutely no one, prepared you for what this feels like. Your periods might be changing, your sleep might be disrupted, you might experience hot flashes or night sweats, or a feeling of your body suddenly being foreign to you. Your skin might be drier. Your metabolism might have become genuinely different, not because you're lazy, but because your hormonal profile has shifted. And here's what's crucial. You've been taught to experience all of this as decline. The culture has no language for perimenopause except as a medical problem to be managed. There's no celebration of it. There's no ritual around it. There's no acknowledgement that you are literally transitioning into a different version of yourself. Instead, you're supposed to pretend it's not happening, or you're supposed to manage it privately with pharmaceutical interventions or natural remedies without ever discussing it, without ever making it visible, without ever allowing it to disrupt the performance of normalcy. You deserve to know that what you're experiencing is not a failure of your body. It's a transition that the culture has deliberately kept hidden because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that women have a life cycle that doesn't end at 35. Here is what no one tells you about 40. You are standing at a threshold where you can finally see both directions. You can see behind you all the ways you made yourself smaller to fit, all the versions of yourself you edited out to be palatable, all the dreams you deferred because they seemed impractical, all the boundaries you didn't set because you were told that being difficult was worse than being used. And you can see ahead, and the view is terrifying because it's no longer infinite. The future has edges now. You can see that certain things won't happen, that certain people won't change, that certain choices were final in ways you didn't understand when you made them. But here's what changes at 40. And this is what the culture is desperate for you not to understand. You stop needing permission to exist, not because you suddenly become confident, but because you run out of time to seek approval from people who were never going to give it anyway. You realize that your 30s were spent trying to prove that you deserved to exist, and your 30s are gone, and you're still here, and you're still not sure you deserve it. But you're running out of runway to keep asking the question, so something shifts. You start to notice which relationships actually feed you, and which ones are extracting from you. And you realize that you have fewer years left than years past, which means you can't afford to spend them on people who are ambivalent about you. You start to notice which work actually matters to you, and which work is just habit or obligation or the path of least resistance. And you realize that you might have 30 more years of work ahead of you, and you actually have to like it. You start to notice your body not as a thing to be managed or improved or apologized for, but as a source of information. When your body says no, you're starting to understand that maybe that's not laziness, maybe that's wisdom. And here's the part that changes everything. The invisibility that began at 35, it's becoming a superpower. When you stop being viewed as sexually available, you gain access to a type of freedom that you never had before. You can take up space without apology. You can have opinions without needing to soften them with likability. You can say no without explaining yourself. The culture has spent your entire life teaching you that your value was tied to your attractiveness and your availability. And now that you're becoming less attractive to the male gaze, and you're understanding that you're also becoming less interested in that gaze, you're finally free to question the entire structure. You deserve to know this 30 years ago, that the goal wasn't to remain young forever. The goal was to become yourself. You're not wrong. The system is. The system was designed by and for people who never had to worry about perimenopause because they never had to experience it. The system was designed to extract maximum productivity from your body during its most vulnerable years. The system was designed to keep you small, uncertain, and constantly trying to prove your worth. And the system is not going to change because you're suffering. The system is going to change, slowly, incrementally, because enough women are reaching 40 and deciding that they're no longer willing to perform the version of themselves that the system demands. Your body at 40 is not a problem. It's a statement. It's saying, I have survived your expectations. I have been shaped by your pressures. I have been exploited by your systems, and I'm still here. And I'm done apologizing for taking up space. At 40, you deserve to know what your body actually needs rather than what you've been told it should want. To have relationships where you're chosen, not tolerated. To do work that feels meaningful, even if it pays less. To take up space without needing to be useful to justify your existence. To grieve what you've lost without needing to perform gratitude for what you have. To be seen, not as a woman who is aging, but as a woman who is becoming. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to stop believing that you were ever broken. Here's a question for you to sit with. What version of yourself have you been performing? And what would happen if you stopped? I'm asking because the answer might surprise you. In the comments, tell me, what did your body try to tell you that no one else was listening for? And if this video landed for you, if it felt like someone finally saying the things you've been thinking alone, please share it with a woman in your life who needs to hear it, because she's standing at a threshold too, and she deserves to know she's not alone. Next week, we're talking about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, because once you hear it, everything changes.